You're listening to the Diginauts on the Good Talk Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Diginauts coming up this week. Can a computer tell if you're gay?
Can you hear me now? Sound is becoming a weapon.
And I'm loving it, but it came from the lab.
Tastes like chicken.
All this and more coming up on the Diginauts.
Society, the future, morality, disruption, policy, humanity, innovation, technology, morality, the future.
I mean, why does any scientist bother doing anything? I don't know.
Diginauts.
Hello, people of Earth. My name is Deron.
And I'm Eric.
And we are the Diginauts. And we're back! It's been a while. I'd love to say we had a really good excuse for why we took a long summer. Why we had... Like, it was a planned thing, is what I want to be able to say. We had a lot of technical difficulties. We figured them out, though. I feel pretty good about this. I'm watching the audio signal in front of us. It's very clean. I think we've beaten the gremlins into submission, so I'm excited about that.
Thank you.
Thank you, who? I just said the audio gremlins are gone, and we just had a drop in your audio. What did you say?
I said thank you, Adobe.
There you go. Yeah. I don't know if we can say that, but whatever, you said it. So anyway, don't give away our secret Diginaut how to do your podcast ebook that we'll be writing in the coming weeks. So Eric, did you watch any of the Apple keynote?
I did. I think it's intriguing.
Did you? I was at work, of course, as where we all watch these, but so I had meetings that kept me out of the first part. I always think it's fascinating the way they talk, that like how close to propaganda it is. It's amazing to me. Like, here's this thing, and it can do this. Isn't that amazing? That's fantastic. Like the way they talk is. It's akin to hypnosis. Like it's reinforcing as it goes. Anyway, what'd you think of the new what's heading our way in Apple technology?
Yeah, I liked it. I mean, I think I like the no button. I like the full glass. I like the supposed stronger glass. I think the face recognition for passwords is intriguing. I like the you become the emoji. I think that's really smart. I think it's their way of having a feature that's theirs versus, relying on other companies to build out apps and whatnot,
Right. There's a hell of a lot of Apple stuff. When it comes out, my first response is like, oh, you mean that thing that Samsung did 3 years ago? and you gave it a name and put a TM after it, and good job, I guess. And then everybody lines up to pay extra for that. That's my response to a lot of things. But the Animoji seems pretty damn cool. I gotta say, I think we're gonna see. I think we'll be sick of it in a year, but for now.
Oh, I think in a day.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But today,
I don't need.
Hooray for the talking poo.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say.
So it segues nicely into our top of mind story, face recognition, right? All sorts of breakthroughs are being made, and a study came out that's causing a stir. This was a assistant professor named Michael Kosinski from Stanford. He put together a study suggesting that artificial intelligence can detect whether or not people are gay or straight. So what a can of worms that opens, right?
Indeed.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's interesting because from a pure science perspective, sure, you're developing AI. Let's test all the different things that humans do versus what artificial intelligence can do. Like any kind of artificial intelligence, we've discussed before, they essentially have to take a giant repository of information, feed it into the AI, and the AI isn't smart. It just builds patterns once it has tens of thousands of data points. It's
This one seems questionable. I don't get why he would want to do this.
like, why bother?
Yeah.
I mean, why does any scientist bother doing anything? I don't know. So here's the thing. I think there's a certain amount of just plain old pure research in, we just saw what Apple was able to put out with facial recognition, right? They are getting to where they can figure out all the polygons in your face and from that track everything. I would assume that gay versus straight was probably just something that they were able to get the data from, because they scooped this out of a dating website.
Oh.
Right? So they probably, that way they could get tens of thousands of faces publicly available and matching data on, how that person identified, at least.
Right.
Because he also then kind of goes on to say, we're pretty sure that this can be done for political beliefs. We're pretty sure that, and it's slippery slope into Minority Report really quickly, because they even, I'm looking right now at theguardian.com, and in there they're talking about how some of the folks involved were even thinking that this might talk about, predilection to crime, just from looking at you, which that ain't no good.
Problem.
That's a problem. But it's an interesting result, right? That if you look at the numbers, the way so they fed all the different profiles in, they found out that the computer algorithm could correctly distinguish between gay and straight men 81% of the time, and 74% of the time for women.
It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, right? I mean, for something that's brand new, that's a fair degree of accuracy. Now, it's far from a useful amount of accuracy to, actually base anything on, right? When you're wrong one time in 5, that's not impressive. Right? Like, you don't want to be making any judgments based on that, certainly. Not that there's a reason to anyway, like you're saying. What's the point? But again, from a pure science point of view, what's interesting to me is that they tested humans. And I feel like there's a degree to where, like, I don't know, people claim they do or don't have like gaydar, right? For the humans, they came in at 61% of the time for men and 54% for women. So a good 20% less accurate, roughly, than the computer was able to do. And when they allowed the software to see multiple images of a given person, the accuracy went up all the way to 91% for men. Evidently, it's easier to tell a gay man than it is to tell a lesbian, whether you're a computer or a human.
Interesting.
But yeah, so giving that sort of extra evidence on the person bumped up the accuracy. That's probably true for humans too, I would assume.
Right.
So all kinds of confounding factors, right? If they used it from a dating site, that means that it's people trying to look their best. It's people trying to be presentable. That's different than I'm scanning you in the airport to see what I get, and whatnot. I don't know. Scary technology. Wouldn't want to see it applied very broadly.
Yeah, it seems unnecessary.
Yeah. Well, immediately there was pushback from the LGBTQ community, as you might expect. GLAAD pointed to the study and they labeled it junk science. They pointed out a whole bunch of, problems with it, including the fact that it didn't include data on bisexual individuals. It hasn't been peer reviewed, so of course they're just shooting every hole in it they can, which is, understandable and easy to do. This is just kind of one of those like, hey, look, we made a thing. That said, it'll be interesting to see if it gets reviewed. It'll be interesting to see if there are applications to it that are actually useful as opposed to what they're talking about here.
Yeah, I'm definitely not seeing any.
Yeah. Well, you never know. I mean, imagine, for example, coming back to the Apple phone, right? It can see you and it turns on right now, right? I saw some people, I want to say it was on Twitter. I don't remember if there was an article attached to it, but they were just posing the thought experiment there, right? Like, okay, imagine you're in a situation where police have done something terrible, right? Police pull somebody over and shoot them while they were videotaping that police officer. Police officer takes the phone, points it at the face, because it's a facial recognition phone, is able to get into their phone and delete the video. Right? Not something you're expecting from the average police officer, but you're not expecting police officers to shoot people either.
Some people do.
Yeah. So the problem with any software like this is we're allowing people to be predisposed based on data. And if you're building artificial intelligence, it's one thing to I think what they might be trying to accomplish here is getting better at reading the human condition, reading emotions, understanding facial cues from the point of a machine, as kind of a human-computer interaction thing.
That's different. I would argue any reading of or inference about someone that they don't know is happening, right?
Yeah.
That's a problem.
No, you're right. Well, I mean, by that definition, right? Like, is the computer allowed to track that you're smiling? It can infer your mood, at least.
Right. But to me that's the equivalent of like me signing up for something online without even knowing it.
Yeah. It's tantamount to, prejudice. It's almost akin to racism. Like, let's build racism into the robots, or sexism, or genderism, or whatever you want to call it. So,
and ism.
Yeah, good that they have the technology, but now you can burn that. Let's never speak of it again. Go find something else to experiment on, scientists. That's what the Diginauts say.
You're listening to the Diginauts on the Good Talk Podcast Network.
Segment 2, we're going to talk about a very weird instance that's baffling officials, where U.S. diplomats in Cuba are suffering severe hearing loss and brain damage, and they're ultimately equating it to some form of a health attack. And as time goes on, as symptoms increase, people are increasingly perplexed as to who's doing this, how it's happening, and why.
So wait, the people impacted are only U.S. diplomats?
Yes. So clearly, right, it has something to do with this segment of people who happen to be U.S. diplomats in Cuba.
Only in Cuba?
Yes.
Creepy.
Yeah. So it's only the people who've been sent to Havana, and they began dating back to like 2016. So our government has been looking into this for quite some time, understanding like who these people are, who the envoys are, and ultimately what symptoms they're experiencing. And ultimately they're experiencing everything from permanent hearing damage to brain injury to even like their central nervous system. And as of now, our State Department's being pretty cagey about
What?
Yeah, exactly. Shocker.
The State Department being cagey. So are there any theories?
There are. I guess there are ones around leveraging sonic waves to basically injure people.
Whoa.
So imagine almost like a sound gun of some extent.
Right. You hear every once in a while about developments in. I mean, essentially, it almost feels like the guns of the future will just be little things you point at people, and then the people will fall down.
Right. Now, what's kind of perplexing people involved in the investigation is that when they're talking to the people who are experiencing these issues, these health issues, people have said everything from feeling vibrations to hearing sounds, ranging from like a high pitch to a chirp, analogous to like crickets. Others heard like some grinding noise, whereas others almost heard like tinnitus or like alarm clocks going off, unfortunately.
Wow.
There's definitely a pattern of these attacks happening at night for brief periods of time.
Have they ruled out demons?
Not sure, but I'm sure it's on the list. That and microwaves that record your conversations. So.
Right. Wow. Well, that's super creepy. And there's not much more for us to say than that's super creepy, right? A lot of times we try to dig a little bit into the story, and this one isn't something that you can really say more to than they don't know, but there's a pattern here, and not a good one. So,
not at all.
Yeah, like any of our stories, we will pay attention, and if there are any developments, we will bring it to the podcast. I hope the development is that U.S. diplomats stop hearing things in their sleep. We'll find out.
Hey, thanks for listening. You know what? Who are you? We really want to know. So there's many ways in which we can find out and many ways in which you can tell us. So one way, you can go to goodtalknetwork.com. I believe there's a contact form. Furthermore, we're on Twitter at Good Talk Network. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're even on YouTube. Leave a comment. Reach out to us. We want to understand like why you're listening, who you are, what's your background, and furthermore, what you want to hear about. Thanks a lot.
Time for segment 3. We're going to look at the future file. And Eric, you have the story for us of lab meat.
Increasingly, right, the whole, there's many controversies around meat, ranging from cruelty to animals to the impact of the environment and raising the animals. Well, obviously it's a big problem, and when there's a big problem in society, venture capital will definitely look to capitalize on that, so to speak. So a variety of people ranging from billionaires to agriculture to venture capitalists are seizing the opportunity to figure out how can they effectively grow their own meat. So instead of like raising cattle or chickens or goats or bison, right? We're talking like lab-grown meat.
Okay, so I feel like I've heard about this for a while, or at least the idea, right?
Many companies doing it.
Okay. Has there been progress lately, or is it just kind of a story that's coming up? Maybe we're going to talk later about the big old dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico that's somewhat related to meat. Is it kind of coming up as part of the current zeitgeist around such things? Or has anybody found like, hey, we've solved part of the artificial meat problem?
I mean, it's in progress, right? Like none of this is really like mass yet, right? Like
Right.
everyone just needs to be like the first, and with that can come obviously significant disruption to agriculture, significant disruption to everything involved, right? Like even speed to market, right? Like there's no need to slaughter. There's no need to like really cut, right? Like you could probably like go get a burger the size, the shape of whatever you want. You know what I mean? So.
Because that's what's missing from the burger experiences. But was it in a star pattern before? Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's potentially a lot of advantages. I feel like the obvious question would be, does it taste like meat, right?
Right.
That's if you truly want mass adoption, you got to find a way to make the Big Mac for 50 cents and have it taste like it came from Carl's Jr.
Right. Or even better,
Right.
But I think once someone has refined this to a point, they are going to make a killing without killing.
I see what you did there. Yeah, well, I mean, you make a good point about the expedience, the sort of like, I don't know. I come from a hunting and fishing kind of family, and I would happily live like off only meat that I killed myself. That to me is kind of the standard. And there's lots of people out there in the world who, to me, are a little hypocritical, where they're like, "Ew, don't kill that," and yet nonetheless, nom 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 nom. So at least I suppose this gets rid of some of that, right? Like, no, it's just some protein that happens to. It's kind of close to like a protein bar, right? Except it happens to be animal protein. And I suppose you could lock in the exact fat percentage to achieve both taste and health benefits.
Yeah. Looking at the Memphis Meats, one of the companies involved in the space, they basically are quoting that Americans spend on chicken alone $90 billion. So it's like that's a lot of dough.
I wouldn't have guessed that it was that big an industry. I mean, I know you see those statistics every Super Bowl of like, Americans will consume 20 gajillion chicken wings today, which means that 40 gajillion chicken, or no, I did that backwards. 10 gajillion chickens will die. Fair enough, I suppose. Yeah, I guess our chicken wings won't be winged. Well, they could be star-shaped now.
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess there's plenty of motivation for companies to get involved in something like that. That makes sense. And as you say, there's quite a lot to be said about, the amount of methane that cows kick out. We're going to discuss later how methane's a worse greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. We've got a bunch of cows sitting around doing nothing but kicking out methane in order to support people's meat habit. There's the whole problem where America's beef interest feeds the market in like Brazil, say, where they'll slash and burn rainforest, bring in cattle. Essentially, it's called nutrient mining, where they those cows consume all of those nutrients, then rather than dying and going back into the grass as Circle of Life would imply, they get shipped off to Ohio. And now those nutrients are gone, and you have to slash and burn more rainforest. So that is a broken system. If we instead keep the nutrients where they are, because the market doesn't need them anymore, because Memphis Meats has figured out how to make a test tube full of something that smells like a duck. All right, more on lab-grown meats as we hear about it.
You're listening to the Diginauts on the Good Talk Podcast Network.
Okay, it's time for segment 4, and you know what that means. Let's dig some more, starting with the perennial favorite. I don't even know what perennial means now that I'm saying it out loud. It's just something people put in front of favorite. Starting with your favorite and mine, Doomed, Darren's omnibus offering of Mother Earth dispatches, a beautiful acronym that just happens to spell doomed, in which we look over some of the headlines surrounding climate change. This is the Dig Some More segment where we go back to things that we've talked about in the past. We were talking about climate change so much that we just kind of gave it its own piece in the show.
Did you trademark doomed?
An excellent idea. I have not yet, but I'll get on the phone with my patent lawyer in a minute. So it's been a while since we've done a show, right? And a whole heck of a lot has happened in environmental news, most of it involving the Trump administration pointing at anything the Obama administration ever did and saying, not that, not that, not that. And we don't need any scientists to be involved in any of the science. Only business leaders.
Drain the swamp.
Drain the swamp and fill it full of people who don't believe in climate change, is evidently the way we're going at this. But so be it, I guess. So, I mean, you know, to hit kind of the big highlights, like a lot has happened, right? We had that big iceberg calve off of Antarctica. I forget how big it was, Rhode Island size or whatever, which, you know, like so many of these things, could just be a thing that happened, right? So it's dismissible. You know, we had another set of giant-ass hurricanes hit, right? So there was the, you know, the one that hit Houston and the one that just hit in Florida. One was a, you know, once every 100 years hurricane, just like Sandy was, and just like what Andrew was or whatever. And now we have a once every 500-year hurricane. So we've had like 3 hurricanes. There should be less than a percentage of happening in like 6-7 years now. So
A coincidence.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's just it, right? They can be individually dismissed as coincidence as long as you want to believe that. Or you could be a little more substantial with your, whatever. Anyway, so a lot of background stuff has happened. There's a couple of little stories I wanted to pick up on just because they're significant. And I also decided the Doomed segment, I think we should end with hope every time, if it can be helped. So we'll start with a couple of terrible, terrible things, and then we'll end with hope. First up, record-breaking dead zone in Gulf of Mexico due to meat industry. Hooray!
Yep.
Yeah, so if you've never heard of this before, the idea, what happens is we, as a result of agriculture, send a lot of nitrates from meat processing and fertilizer from essentially all of the farming that happens along the Mississippi Delta. It goes into the Mississippi River, it goes into the Gulf, and all of the algae in the Gulf is like, yummy, nitrates. This is what plants need to grow. Right? There's a reason we use it as fertilizer in the first place. So all of the algae blooms hard, and then it dies, and then it goes to the bottom of the ocean, and then plant gets taken over by animal, and a bunch of bacteria start decomposing all that algae that died on the surface. Well, all those bacteria are breathing oxygen, so they suck all the oxygen out of the water to the point that fish die from not being able to breathe. Yeah, good stuff. And this happens in the Gulf of Mexico, a giant body of water, and it happens on a regular basis. And this year, it's by far one of the largest that they've ever seen. So that's always encouraging.
So I guess what animals eat algae?
Tons of animals eat algae. Those little sucker fish that go in people's aquariums. Yeah, you're saying just cranking a lot more. Like if you're getting that many more algae, then just feed them to something else that won't use up all the oxygen or cause them to decompose. I hear you. I mean, look, everything's a system, right? So whenever you have one thing have a population explosion, usually nature kind of handles that by exactly as you say, right? If there's too many bunnies in a field, then the hawks have a good year of reproducing, right? And if there's not enough bunnies in the field, the hawks don't have as good a year. And then once there's too many hawks, right, then the hawks starve, and it just all kind of balances out over time. And most natural systems can handle that sort of thing, unless human beings start cranking in stressors at levels beyond, what's tolerable. And that seems to be what's happening. So good stuff. There's another biggie that was easy to miss because they've kind of been hinting that it's going to happen soon, but it finally happened. A ship went across the Arctic. No icebreaker, just the ship.
Okay. So did it encounter ice?
Certainly, but it was able to get through that ice. So
are you saying there's less ice? Like, what are you telling me?
the ice has thinned, and it's melting to the point that, you're essentially... previously, if they wanted to push through the Arctic, even during the summer, they would have to take, like, icebreakers, they're called. They're basically like tiny little high gear, like tugboats with a snowplow on the front of them, whose job it is to crack through the ice so that if there's a path, then a giant ship can follow through, because that giant ship can kind of push the ice, but it needs something to go through and crack it to begin with. And we just had a ship, a Russian tanker, was able to get through the Arctic without that happening. So there's some good stuff for you. And that is a first. It's something they've been concerned about happening. Now, the interesting thing about it is that represents a significant improvement in trade. This particular tanker went from Norway to South Korea in 19 days, which is 30% faster than how it would normally go through the Suez Canal.
Nice.
Sure. So on some level, woohoo, right? It's similar to the arguments that some countries are now having over the oil reserves that are available in the Arctic. We can finally get to them in a way we've never been able to. And so all of the sudden, you have territory wars between Russia, Norway, the United States over what used to be big old wastelands, and which are now, giant reserves of oil and gas. So it definitely marks one of those moments of like, oh, there's no going back on that, because now that that's happened, everybody's going to want to send their ships through as fast as possible. And of course, theoretically, the more we start melting, the more that's going to be available in the summer. So
right.
That happened.
Ship.
And of course, it's going to get worse because in Russia, speaking of, there are giant craters blowing out of the permafrost. So the idea behind permafrost is that typically the soil is supposed to be frozen hard. And I mean, it's built into the name, right? Permafrost. That it's regular ground that's normally forever frozen. Exactly. It's permanently frozen. That's where they came up with the, what's it called? Portmanteau or something. French word meaning two words shoved together. But what's happening is the heating is happening enough that, especially in the summer, that soil is starting to heat up to the point that some of the gases that are trapped into it can escape. And the gases that are trapped in there happen to be carbon gases. One of the biggies is methane. Methane, of course, is a significantly worse greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. It's like 80 times worse. So not only is that carbon not being trapped, it's being released into the atmosphere. It's causing giant sinkholes and craters behind it, which are taking out trains and roadways. And then it's going into the atmosphere, where it's in turn going to cause more heating, which will cause more permafrost to be released, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're all going to die.
So, how do you fix this?
I mean, how do you fix all of it, right? Like, if the planet is a giant system and we've thrown it out of whack, the problem is we are positively reinforcing the cycle, right? So it's going in a bad direction, but the fact that it's going in a bad direction is creating a feedback loop that in turn is causing more bad direction to happen, like the case of the permafrost, which will in turn only defrost more permafrost, which will then send out more gas, which will defrost more permafrost, until eventually Siberia is just a swamp of mud.
We need a permafrost machine.
Yeah, like that story we talked about previously where they wanted to refreeze the glaciers. I mean, look, you in all seriousness, you talk about how do we reverse this? You got to retrap that carbon somehow. Whether it's... And at this point, it doesn't really matter, right? Like, build a big old sifter that sucks it all in and it just sits there as dust. That's fine, as long as it's not up in the air causing more heating and more feedback loop.
Or could you break it down into something that's not harmful?
The methane?
Yeah.
Well, you can light it on fire, and it will turn into, water. But then it releases. Anyway, no is the answer. Stop putting greenhouse gases into the air. Anyway, so to finish out Doomed, like I said, I'm going to try to find the ray of light. Any place where there's any glimmer of hope on environmental issues. And this headline popped up on iflscience.com. American honeybees are doing better in 2017. Woohoo! You don't sound impressed.
I mean, my thing is like similar to the LA drought, right? Like people raised the alarms, people adapted. But I think when you start to say, hey, things are better, I think people throw it by the wayside,
You mean like with the LA droughts, like everybody's just using water indiscriminately now?
Exactly.
Now that there was enough rain to kind of, yeah. And it didn't make the problem any better just because there's, because the predictions, if we keep going where we're going, is that California will continue to face severe droughts over the next few years. Yep, you could be right. That said, the colony collapse disorder with the bees, they don't really know what caused it, right? I have seen, I can't tell you how many studies where it's like, hey, we finally figured out what colony collapse disorder is all about. And then they offer their thesis and a tiny bit of evidence. And then another study comes out and says, well, no, it wasn't pesticides. It turns out it was this little fungus that attacks a certain number of bees, et cetera, et cetera. So they're now kind of in this world of like, actually, maybe it's a big combination of a bunch of factors. The little mites that used to be impacting the bee colonies. In 2016, 53% of the bee colonies they studied had these little bloodsuckers on the bees. Whereas this summer it went down to 42%. So at least in commercial hives, like that might be a natural cycle. That might be something that's happened on cutting down pesticides, but a bit of a positive concern. And by now there's been enough like, oh no, we're all going to die. We're not going to have any bees. And then we're not going to be able to have any fruit or vegetables. And then, I mean, really, we are all going to die.
Or just replace them with little drones.
Yeah. Oh, that's totally out there, right? The little mechanical, teeny tiny little drones that are supposed to do the job of bees. It doesn't seem practical to me. I figure anytime nature is giving you an answer, you don't need to find a replacement answer.
Well, if nature's offering goes away.
Right. Fair enough. Well, maybe we can find ways to help it not go away. All right, so that was doomed for this week. Guess who's back, Eric? Monkey Selfie.
What?
Monkey Selfie is back. This is something that has come up on our show a few times. And one of my favorite things about it is that Eric and I completely disagree, which doesn't happen too often, right? But like, I can't say I have a strong opinion on it, but you and I definitely have been like, no. I think this and I think this. So this is the story of a wildlife photographer who had his camera set up to take pictures. A macaque came along in a nature preserve, picked up the camera, took a picture of itself, and then when he took those photographs, Wikimedia put it up, and they claimed, well, this picture is in the public domain. PETA got involved, suing, saying that, actually, no, the monkey should own the copyright. The photographers...
Yes,
What's that?
Yes, indeed.
Right. And Eric comes down on the side that monkey took the picture, monkey owns the copyright.
And the monkey has a name, Naruto.
Yeah, Naruto. I think it's a Japanese animation show. I'm gonna turn in my nerd card. No, I'm not. I got plenty of other nerd cred. Anime is not high on the list. Anyway, point of the story is, the little guy with a name took a picture of himself. So this went to court. PETA, which I think is very smart if you're PETA, totally championed this case. Essentially, it would have been groundbreaking precedent for establishing animal rights, right? If you're actually giving that animal copyright. I say it's a slippery slope to parrots with driver's licenses, but, whatevs. So we finally got a result. They settled. So the conclusion was that the photographer, or I'm looking at this in the New York Times, they describe him as the camera's owner, which I suppose is a fair point. He did not take this photograph, but he is a photographer by profession. He agreed to donate 25% of future revenue of the images that the monkey took to charitable organizations specifically that support the animal reserve where the monkey lives. So on some level, the monkey got a royalty. And the people involved chose to kind of spend it on his behalf to donate it to reserves. So, I mean, there you have it, right? What do you think? Are you pleased?
It's a step in the right direction.
Oh, you took PETA's side on that because they basically are like, well, we were hoping for 100%. Meanwhile, the photographer's like, that's great. I'm an artist. I can't afford to fly to the United States to participate in this trial. I was thinking of taking a second job. What did he say? It was like sweeping floors or something, to be able to make ends meet. But here's your 25%. So, I mean, it's the interesting thing about this case, right? Like, is both sides recognized it as important and groundbreaking, and they're both. Dude's a wildlife photographer who was working in a nature reserve. Like, he is on nature's side too. So,
what if the monkey is trying? What if monkeys had cameras and they're taking all these photos? And
well, so the way I read this, and if anybody's listening who has a better grasp of law than me, which should be 98% of our audience, the way I read this, they essentially punted on the issue of animal rights. So they settled in terms of funding for the pictures that are royalties off of any funds raised by the pictures that this monkey took. The camera's owner will get 75% and the reserve will get 25%. But they didn't set any precedent legally in terms of the monkey owning things. I mean, I suppose they probably took a baby step, right? The next time this shows up, a lawyer will probably use this as some kind of precedent. But they didn't really establish any kind of, this monkey owns stuff now, so.
Well, I think PETA's going to do a camera drop in the jungle.
You should write them.
just like someone proposed to solve the North Korea thing. Just drop 25 million iPhones, and then you can't stop. And then put a satellite with internet above.
A specific North Korean satellite that's like, here's your internet.
Exactly.
It's got to be cheaper than a bomb.
And a little better solution.
Slightly less destructive. Okay, last story we want to revisit. We've talked many times about driverless cars and the impact that they could have on the economy, the impact they are going to have on society, and sort of the ethics surrounding how driverless cars work and how decisions are made in those crisis moments of there's going to be a crash. Do I go into that crowd of people? Do I, the example we've brought up a few times is sort of like, is that car going to have to make a value judgment on which person it hits, right? If it's in a situation where if I go this way, that person dies. If I go that way, that person dies. We were saying, well, gosh, do you have the algorithm understand how many years or make a guess at how many years the person may have left on their lives, et cetera, et cetera? Well, the world's...
Grandma, let's go.
Well, yeah, I mean, who knows, right? I mean, it's certainly if a human being were in that situation, there is a certain unspoken, maybe grandma does go if grandma has 10 years and grandson has, 80 years ahead of him. Who knows? Some people would make that case. Anyway, the conversation has been had now. Germany's cabinet produced a report on automated driving, and specifically, they set up an ethics commission on automatic driving and released a report on, hey, here's how we're going to do automated driving. So they had the ethical conversations about the big picture of it and said, all right, here's what we're going to do. They fully recognized that it's too early in the process to come up with a complete set. So they did say, we're going to revisit this and revisit this. It's a living document. But it was a set of rules to be fundamental of like, if you're going to go the path of automated driving, which seems inevitable, we come up with, some guidelines of how it's supposed to work.
Right.
Eric, did you have any things you thought were fundamental to the what should be in the ethics rules?
That's a good question. Don't kill anybody. How about that one?
Right. Yeah, I mean, so there's the problem is there's going to be situations where someone's going to die, right? So there's the train dilemma or the trolley dilemma that people talk about, where the train is headed towards one track that has a person on it. You, as the operator of the switch of which track the train is going to go on, or excuse me, I'm doing that wrong. The train is heading towards 5 people. If you flip the switch, the train will move to the track that has one person standing on it. Do you or don't you flip the switch, knowing that your action will cause the one person to die who would have lived, but you will save 5 lives at the same time, right? So this is kind of a classic ethical dilemma, and when you put it in the context of cars, you sort of need a decision-making mechanism in that car because it's going to face some situations like that. Anyway, what they came up with was humans before animal and property. That seems fundamental. And then
As in save them.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I mean that seems really basic, right? Hit the deer, don't hit grandma. Now, we just talked about PETA.
Just don't hit. Just don't hit the monkey with the camera.
Right, exactly. So there will be, I'm sure, some pushback to that. I can see some concerned groups, feeling that way. But I bet we can have consensus on, yeah, okay, kill the dog. Sorry, but save the kid playing with the ball, even if it's the kid's fault. There you go. And then property, obviously, as well. Like if you got to smack into a mailbox in order to save, the guy in the middle of the street, so be it. They put in place some thought around hacking to make sure that there are safeguards so that you can't just take over somebody's car. And then the biggie is there's no discrimination allowed as to who should survive. So
What do you mean? It seems like they've already violated that.
Well, in terms of humans for animals, but once you're talking about humans, basically they said minimize damage is kind of the underlying rule. So in the example before, I think that means in the trolley dilemma, it means that the software would kill the one person. I think. It's going after the lesser of two evils, right? So it's, will people die? Let's kill as few people as possible. Whatever outcome that software judges is going to, so our example of, is it Toby the 10-year-old or is it Grandma Agnes, right? It's going to, it's not going to make that decision. It's going to attempt to minimize damage overall.
Right.
And of course, this is just a bunch of guidelines, right? This has to be implemented in software. But it's an interesting first step for a government body to take. For a country that has quite a few car-making companies in it to offer guidance on. We'll see how that plays out around the world and whether it'd be an interesting thing to see, if different laws come to be in different countries. So if there are any developments, we will certainly let you know. Meanwhile, that's been another episode of the Diginauts. Thanks for coming back to us and listening. We know we've been away for a while, but we're here. We're back. We'll be here, I don't know, next week even. So by all means, whatever your podcast listening mechanism is, find us there again soon. You can talk to us about any of the things we discussed on today's show. Go to Good Talk Network on Twitter. On Twitter, I am at Digital Deron.
I'm Matt E. Fader.
And we'd be happy to talk to you about any of that stuff. If you go to goodtalknetwork.com, you can find phone numbers, you can find comment forms, you can find emails. Hit us up with anything you'd like to discuss on the show. You're welcome to record your message and we'll play it back as part of our conversation. We greatly appreciate you listening, and we look forward to talking to you about science and technology again soon. Thanks a lot, Eric. Good talk.
Thank you.